Back in 2014, a chilling internet rumor began going around about a derelict Yugoslavian cruise ship called the MV Lyubov Orlova. The Orlova was named after a Russian film star of the same name. Back in 1976, the ship was built to withstand the frigid and icy Antarctic waters, and was originally used for luxury cruises. The ship would be refurbished in 1999, with more extensive renovations taking place 3 years later in 2002. Then in November of 2006, the Lyubov Orlova ran aground at Deception Island. She was towed to safety by a Spanish naval icebreaker, but after that, her streak of bad luck just kept growing from there. Over time, the ship's owners managed to get in some financial hot water. By 2010, they were heavily in debt, and the more than 50 crew members didn't get paid for over 5 months. Eventually, the ship was impounded in St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada, and would be sold to an international shipping company to be broken up for salvage. For 2 years, the ship remained docked in St. John's. Then in February of 2012, the ship was pulled out of the harbor by a tugboat headed for the Dominican Republic. But the tow line snapped early on during the trip, leaving the vessel to drift aimlessly out to sea. But although the ship was considered derelict, a rumor began spreading that it wasn't exactly empty either. A story began to spread around the internet that the ship was full of cannibalistic rats that had multiplied over the years to the tens of thousands, having consumed every scrap of food left on board the vessel. That left the rats with the only food source remaining: each other. The most disturbing part of the story of all was that the Lyubov Orlova appeared to be drifting back inland, directly toward County Kerry in Ireland. Now, if you don't recall hearing the news story about an army of cannibalistic rats overtaking the Emerald Isle, that's because that portion of the story doesn't seem to be the least bit true. It appears to have been sparked after a salvager made some wild speculation about the vessel to a reporter from the British tabloid The Sun. Although several searches for the wayward vessel were made, the ship was never found, and most experts today presume it sank. There's something particularly terrifying about ghost ships. These mysterious vessels that are found floating adrift across the vast oceans with no crew on board have become the stuff of legend. One of the most terrifying such stories allegedly occurred in June of 1947, after a disturbing distress call was sent out by a ship called the Ourang Medan, although that ship is often known by another nickname, the Death Ship. One of the most chilling legends you'll ever hear of a ghost ship dates back to June of 1947, when several ships sailing through the Straits of Malacca between Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore began picking up a desperate SOS message from a Dutch freighter called the SS Ourang Medan. The message read, "We float. All officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in the chart room and bridge." There was a brief pause, then this was followed by another line that only compounded the already tragic message. This line said, "Possibly whole crew dead." Then came another pause before the last two words came through. It simply said, "I die." According to the most popular version of the story, several British and Dutch listening posts throughout the region were able to triangulate the location of the ship that sent the eerie distress signal. An American merchant ship, the Silver Star, was about 19 hours away and was dispatched to the Ourang Medan's coordinates. Many hours later, the Silver Star managed to locate the stricken vessel about 50 nautical miles away from her last position. Even at a distance, the crew of the Silver Star could see that there was something wrong with the Ourang Medan. There were no signs of life on board as they approached, and all efforts to radio the Ourang Medan were met with silence. The captain of the Silver Star formed a search party, and the Ourang Medan was boarded. From the moment the search party first stepped foot on the Ourang Medan, the men felt something odd. Even though thermometers were reading temperatures in excess of 100 degrees Fahrenheit that day, the air on board the Ourang Medan felt oddly cold as the crew of the Silver Star searched the vessel. The rescue team headed toward the bridge first. They heard music playing, which gave them some hope that someone was still alive on board. But this wasn't to be the case. Inside the bridge, they found several members of the crew, including the captain, all still seated at their stations. Their eyes were wide open and their expressions were frozen in terror. The communications officer, who was presumably the person who had sent the distress call, was still seated at his post as well. His hands were frozen on the radio controls, and his teeth were bared in a savage rictus grin. As the search team continued looking deeper into the vessel, they found more and more bodies strewn everywhere. Many of these corpses were contorted, their arms still stretched out as if they were fighting off an invisible enemy. Even the ship's dog hadn't been spared. The animal was found frozen in place, just like all the others, its teeth drawn back in mid-snarl. Despite the horrific conditions each of the corpses of the Ourang Medan's crew were in, there were no visible signs of injuries to any of these men. They were all just dead. Bodies were found in the wheelhouse, the chart room, the bridge, all of which appeared to have suffered the same horrific fate. In total, 22 men were found dead. Something else strange the crew of the Silver Star noted was that, for some reason, the dead appeared to be decaying quicker than normal. After the search party returned to the Silver Star to report to the captain what they had found, some members of the crew began to notice that smoke had begun billowing from below decks on the Ourang Medan. It soon became apparent that the ship was on fire. The captain of the Silver Star ordered his men to cut the tow ropes attached to the derelict ship. Within seconds, a series of explosions ripped through the Ourang Medan, the last of which was powerful enough to lift the boat right out of the water. Immediately after, the Ourang Medan sank to a watery grave beneath the ocean. The story of the Ourang Medan is one of the most enduring and disturbing legends of a fabled ghost ship to have ever been encountered. But is any of it true? Like the story of the cannibal rats I mentioned earlier, the evidence is rather scarce to support this story. One of the earliest known reports of the tale appeared in the June 1953 issue of Fate magazine in an article titled Death at Sea that recounted most of the details I've described here. Noted UFO author Morris K. Jessup also cited the story in his 1955 book, The Case for the UFO, in which he speculated that the Ourang Medan may have been attacked by UFOs or other paranormal forces. In both the Fate magazine article and Morris Jessup's book, the authors claim that many of the frozen corpses were all pointing towards some unseen enemy at the moment of death. Another unusual source for this story comes to us from the CIA archives. In December 1959, a resident of Scottsdale, Arizona named C.H. Mark Jr. sent a letter to the assistant to CIA Director Alan Dulles, inquiring about the Ourang Medan incident. In the letter, C.H. Mark cites a few historical incidents in which mysterious fiery spheres were seen rising up out of the ocean, as early as 1500 AD. Perhaps most unusual of all, though, this letter remained classified as top secret until May of 2003. Now, there are plenty of skeptics who doubt the story of the Ourang Medan. Perhaps the most telling piece of evidence that the story isn't true is the simple fact that no such ship with the name the Ourang Medan was ever registered with Lloyd Shipping, which kept records of all such ships on the ocean. At the same time, there are a couple of possible explanations for this as well. For one, it's certainly within the realm of possibility the actual name of the ship has been changed or misquoted in subsequent tellings of the story. Another possibility that directly relates to some of the theories about what might have happened to the Ourang Medan's crew also suggests that the ship's true name might have been changed to hide what it was really doing. Some versions of the story of the Ourang Medan you'll come across claim that a single lifeboat was missing from the vessel when the crew of the Silver Star boarded her. In those versions of the tale, on July 12, 1947, approximately 3 weeks after the Ourang Medan exploded, that same lifeboat washed ashore on the island of Taongi, which is part of the Marshall Islands. Of the 7 passengers on board, 6 were already dead. But there remained one survivor, and he was cared for by a missionary. That survivor was named Jerry Rabbit, and he had quite a story to tell. He told the missionary that the Ourang Medan originally arrived in Shanghai, China on June 7, 1947, when Rabbit was recruited to work as the ship's second officer. Rabbit thought the offer of work was strange since the ship's captain did not ask to see any of his usual papers or credentials. But Rabbit needed the work and didn't ask too many questions. From what little the man could glean, the ship had originally been a Chinese steamer that had once been used for cargo, or as a troop transport. In Shanghai, the ship picked up 7,000 boxes of some unknown materials in the middle of the night. From there, the ship sailed south on June 9, 1947. Shortly after, the ship docked in a small harbor about 80 nautical miles south of Shanghai, where the ship once again picked up a load of 8,000 boxes of some unnamed cargo. Rabbit suspected everything they picked up had to be some sort of contraband, but once again he didn't ask what was in the cargo, and nobody shared that information with him either. He also noticed the Ourang Medan charted an unusual course that avoided the usual shipping routes, leading them through the Marianas and Carolina Islands. After 10 days at sea, sometime around June 21st, the ship's stokers began to fall mysteriously ill. Soon after, one of them died of unknown causes. The captain claimed the man died of heat stroke. A few days later, more of the crew began complaining of suffering severe stomach cramps. But the captain ignored these complaints as well. Jerry Rabbit finally took it upon himself to investigate further. He began digging through the ship's logbooks and he made a chilling discovery. He learned that the Ourang Medan was carrying 15,000 boxes of sulfuric acid and cyanide, along with 20 canisters of nitroglycerin. Rabbit began to suspect that some of these containers had begun to leak, causing the crew to fall ill due to toxic fumes. Since the captain refused to radio for help, Rabbit gathered 6 of the crew members with him, and they stole one of the lifeboats in order to get to safety. But since the lifeboat was not equipped with water or provisions, the 6 other crew members all died within a few days due to the intense heat. Even Jerry Rabbit barely survived before the lifeboat ran ashore. The idea that the Ourang Medan may have been carrying contraband is one of the main theories why there appear to be no records of the ship's existence. The name Medan actually refers to a Sumatran island from which the ship may have been registered. The full name Ourang Medan translates to Man of Medan. One alternate theory suggests that perhaps the ship was a Dutch freighter that had been commandeered by Indonesian pirates to ferry illicit cargo, and thus would explain why the name would have changed and why it would have not been documented. But if there's any truth to the story of the lone survivor known as Jerry Rabbit, then it's also possible the Ourang Medan may have been in the employ of a major world government, perhaps even the United States, ferrying chemical weapons. During World War II, it is known that the Nazis had a highly active program to develop chemical weapons and other deadly nerve agents. Many of these they shared with the other members of the Axis, including Japan. After the war, one of the typical ways in which the Allied governments would dispose of these chemicals was to transport them to the middle of the ocean and dump them overboard. Was it possible then that Jerry Rabbit was telling the truth and the Ourang Medan was transporting some sort of deadly chemical cargo, which somehow sprang a leak, killing everyone on board? The Geneva Protocol of 1925 was ratified by 33 nations outlawing all chemical weapons. So if we are to believe the story that the Ourang Medan was carrying such illegal cargo, then it would make sense the ship would need to do so under the utmost secrecy. Marine historian Roy Bainton believes this scenario is possible. He said that if seawater breached the Ourang Medan's hold, then it's possible it could have created a deadly chemical reaction, releasing poisonous fumes. This also may explain what led to such a violent explosion as well. One major problem we face with the story of the Ourang Medan is that a lot of the details of the story shift from telling to telling, which is also why many skeptics have come to the simple conclusion that the entire story is made up. The earliest known reports of the Ourang Medan's fate actually predate World War II. Although the most popular version of events first appeared in the Dutch periodical Elsevier's Weekly back in January 1948. At least one earlier version of the story can be dated back to 1939 or 1940. In this version, although the distress call remained similar to what was reported in Elsevier's Weekly, this time, though, the radio operator abandoned a request for medical attention and instead demanded that a warship come to their rescue. A British merchant ship responded, finding a dozen crew members dead on board. Also in this version, there were none of the details but the dead bodies being contorted in fear. The detail that the radio operator requested a warship suggests that the cause of death might have actually come from a pirate attack. The idea that some sort of gas or chemical leak might have been the cause of the deaths appears to originate from a 1953 German booklet titled The Death Ship in the South Seas, written by an author named Otto Mielke. He suggested that the Ourang Medan had actually been carrying an illicit cargo of potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin, and that the ship's crew had a vested interest in keeping their trip a secret. A volatile cargo of nitroglycerin could certainly explain why the ship would have exploded. Potassium cyanide could have also killed the entire crew. Although the symptoms of such poisonings wouldn't cause the crew to die in such painfully contorted positions, One additional theory suggests that the deadly cargo being hauled by the SS Ourang Medan may actually have originated from Japan. During World War II, the Japanese operated a horrifying biological weapons laboratory known as Unit 731. A Japanese bacteriologist named Shiro Ishii led the terrible human experiments conducted by the unit. Perhaps the Japanese military used the foreign cargo vessel to transport whatever deadly biological weapons they cooked up because they didn't want to draw attention to themselves. Only something went horribly wrong. Although the details of the story of the Ourang Medan keep changing through each telling, one name that appears again and again is that of the first reporter to ever tell the story, an Italian journalist named Silvio Shirley. He first reported the tale to the Associated Press back in 1940, although about 8 years later Shirley reported the story again, this time changing the date to 1947 and adding further details that weren't mentioned in 1940. For example, it's from Shirley that we get the story of Jerry Rabbit. Shirley claims that he heard the story from the missionary who attempted to nurse Rabbit back to health. According to Shirley, the ship's former second officer died in the missionary's care, but not before telling his story about the unregistered cargo and deadly chemicals on board. We'll likely never know if the story of the Ourang Medan is real or not. It's possible that Silvio Shirley made the whole story up just to sell some newspapers. Or perhaps he got the bare facts of the story correct, but went on to embellish it many times. But as far as unexplained mysteries go, the story of the Ourang Medan is just scary enough and just believable enough that perhaps it really did happen. Thanks so much for checking out this video. If you like this content and want to see more like it, then please help us out by liking this video and hitting the subscribe and bell icons to be informed when new content goes up.